This episode is brought to you by Progressive, where drivers who save by switching save nearly $750 on average. Quote now at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, national average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, let's go to 1919, when the United States Department of Agriculture launched a campaign against what were known as scrub bulls. The USDA defined a scrub bull as an inferior male cow of, quote, mixed or unknown breeding. It was important, as agriculture and farming was industrializing in this country, to try and keep livestock as high quality as possible. But throughout the 1920s, this focus on good breeding among cows expanded in all sorts of weird and deep ways. For one, and this is the thing that really caught our eye with this story, we got to the point in this country where there were what were known as scrub bull trials. So-called inferior cows were put on trial at county fairs and the like, where they were made to account for their substandard breeding and then often at the end of the trial put to death. The USDA even sent out instructions for how to conduct such a trial in your own town. So shout out to listener Victoria, who suggested we look into the scrub bull trials. I haven't encountered a story in a long time. I feel like that has felt more like us. And shout out to listeners for really getting a story that feels like right up our alley. But let's talk about the scrub bull trials and also something that does tie into these larger obsessions of the era with breeding and genetics and quote unquote good stock, not just within animals. So here, as always, are Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Can I say something that I said in Slack earlier, which is, gosh, I love our listeners.
I know. This is such a good story. And also shout out to historian Gabriel Rosenberg, who has been doing a lot of research in this area. It's one of those things that as soon as you hear about it, you're like, I need to know more about this.
Yeah, totally. So I gave my little cursory definition of a scrub bull, but I guess let's lay that groundwork and then talk about why that was so important in this moment. But a scrub bull is what?
Well, it's a cow that doesn't have the best genes, right? So that if you use this scrub bull to sire, you're going to get cattle that, maybe are a little underweight, maybe are a little gamey or stringy, maybe are prone to sickness or are smaller in size. And what that means is if you are a scratch farmer, like a hard scrabble farmer who is barely getting by, it costs pretty much as much money, if not more, to raise a sick cow as to raise a healthy one, to raise a undersized cow as to raise a really hardy, hefty one. And yet one is going to bring you a very good price on market and one is not. And so part of the idea behind this is that those scrub bulls make bad scrub calves. And it means that you're, as a farmer, sinking further and further into penury if you decide to keep breeding with one of these cows.
Yeah, that all these genes of like long horns or overmuscular cows or sick cows, all of that's going to get in the gene pool, and then you're never going to be able to operate outside of that.
And it's funny, I mean, Niki, you mentioned kind of the effect on a small farm, which I think makes sense, right? But I think so much of this story is actually farms getting bigger and bigger and bigger in this moment of agricultural scale and mass sort of agricultural industrialization. I mean, that's really where the USDA's head is at. The agriculture industry in this country in the 19-teens into the 20s is like turning into an absolute juggernaut, and we need to be able to farm at a mass scale, and stuff like this really matters when you kind of compound.
I know that this story is going to take us in a million different directions, but just to flag that World War I is the reason why. The U.S. agricultural system, mechanization and other things matter too, but it goes into overdrive in order to provide food for the war. And suddenly you have, like you were saying, Jody, these bigger mechanized farms that both need great product and need markets to sell that great product.
Remember the push to eat hippo meat, right? That's around the around this same time, right? It's like we have these huge demands. We're building all these massive farms.
the American landscape has changed. So when you think about like a post-Civil War, early 20th century moment, you have all of this expansion onto, westward lands. You have the removal of Native Americans. And so all of this land is going to cultivate food production. The Homestead Act is a big part of that as well. So the way people are taking advantage of the land and trying to maximize profits as best as they can is all a part of the narrative.
So this moment that we're marking here is the fall of 1919. The USDA launches a campaign known as the Better Sires, Better Stock campaign. And it is basically a war on scrub bulls and an effort to sort of shift the livestock in the United States towards more purebred sires. And they start to distribute pamphlets called like Runts and the Remedy, and from scrubs to quality stock. And there's charts that both show how to manage your livestock and also show the sort of economic benefits of having strong livestock versus scrubs. But it's this real concerted campaign to the point where the USDA kind of like designates scrub stocks as like a national security threat or like a danger to the I mean, just to kind of say that.
Is it that bad?
Well, I mean, if you think that these inferior cattle are not only bringing people down, but providing poor nutrition, again, coming out of World War I, there was this concern that like a third of the conscripted men were in too poor of health to be good soldiers. And these good sires mean better stock, mean better soldiers, is one way they...
Totally.
I mean, I'm just going to keep coming back to World War I.
I know, but it gets on my nerves because I feel like there's so many other issues that go into like unfit soldiers than just meat. Do you know? Yes. I mean, we did a whole thing about people's teeth, how soldiers' teeth disqualify them because there was no fluoride in the water. Like, this is another episode, but I do feel like there's all of sort of the value issues that go around fitness become really problematic when you start to think about like what it is that we are consuming and sort of like the discussion around how we consume or what we consume. It just becomes very slippery.
Yeah.
Are we moving into the problematic, or do you want to talk about the trials first? Because I think we have
let's talk about the trials first, and then
All
right.
right.
I think there's lots of ways this taps into many other larger problematic themes of the area. I'll just also paint another. I mean, we're coming out of the war, right? You've described those pressures. Just on the sort of horizon is going to be a sort of, just as the U.S. is expanding and industrializing, there's also going to be a real big agricultural commodities crisis. And in the 20s, like those prices collapse, which, obviously leads into the Depression and sort of, has all sorts of lingering effects. But so it is at this very perilous, high stakes moment that this is a central question. But as we said, it sort of plays out in some absurd ways. So it goes beyond just here's a pamphlet on how to have more efficient and better performing livestock on your farm, which I think is a very reasonable thing. It ends up in these scrub bull trials. So, who wants to take the lead here on what a scrub bull trial? You're living in
the performance of it all. It's like you got the sheriff there. You have like townspeople that have come out. They're like, heary. Like I'm just like, are you kidding me right now?
Calling into order the court of bovine justice.
So this is usually at a county fair, right? So we're it's a summer. You're in Iowa or Oklahoma or somewhere, and you wander the county fair, and there's the usual things that happen at county fair, and the sort of county fair phenomenon is also taking off in this moment for all these same reasons.
And county fairs are about like who has the biggest cow, who has the biggest squash. Like that's already part of what a county fair is. So this fits in really nicely.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting the world together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
So you want to tell the story of one of these more notable trials?
Yeah, well, one of these trials that happens in Pickens County, South Carolina, the scrub bull, Mr. Scrub Bull was his name. There's some respect due to the scrub bull. And the officer sort of like reads out a bill of indictments. He says the defendant works in a very underhand way, stealing the profits from every dairyman and butcher who has common cows, robbing the unsuspecting, the careless, and the ignorant alike, causing their innocent children to suffer for milk and working men to be in want of meat. Crimes against humanity being raised against this bull.
Wow.
But not just that, like, crimes against the herd. There's a case in Markle, Indiana, where they put a bull on trial for crimes against the herd, basically saying that this bull had, sort of contaminated the rest of the herd and all of that, and they put this defense up against him, and the jury convicts this bull, this scrub bull, and then they sentence the bull to death. And the bull gets executed right after that. And there's something about this spectacle that feels very much like, what is it, judge, jury, executioner. This whole idea of, like, you come before this group of people, they deem you unfit, and then you are executed on the spot. And then what becomes of that, cow's carcass? I don't know. Do they eat it? Do they is there a barbecue right after?
It's got to be good enough for barbecue.
Yeah, like picture taking. I'm sure there's a whole spectacle around this.
And there really is like they do skits. Like the USDA provides dialogue, and then you have like townspeople playing along, and they're like talking about the difference between a scrub bull and a purebred bull, and it really does play out like a little skit that they do to make this trial come to life.
Yeah, so we should say the USDA around 1924 actually publishes a proper pamphlet outlining how you should conduct one of these trials. Yeah, and it calls for a judge, a jury, attorneys. It says that there should be a sheriff who should be wearing a, quote, large metal star and carrying a gun. And, they offer a local attorney volunteers to be the defense, and offer a good defense and so forth. So, to start to overthink this, because I think this is a rich text, so to speak. There's one thing that sort of jumps out at me, which is like this question of how much is it pageant and weird fun and sort of community play, because I think there is a sense of like whimsy and absurdity in this for sure. But I think what's so sort of compelling to me is how it really gets right at that often very blurry line between, oh, it's a joke or, oh, this is a pageant. And then, wait a minute. Is this a joke? What's really going on here? What are we tapping into? And so many of these sort of things that this evokes fall right in on that blurry line. But kind of where do you start? Let's start there. Where do you come down on kind of this idea of like, was this fun and games and absurdity, and you should show up and have fun, have weird fun at your local at your state fair, or is there something deeper? And
I think there's a larger sort of sentiment among the culture and community of fitness and value. And I think that eugenics and the eugenics movement is walking lock in step with these kinds of trials, that you can make very direct connections between like people and animals, or the treatment of the poor and the treatment of people that we see as expendable or unfit or disabled. And that becomes a huge movement in the 1920s to sort of breed out diseases, poverty, as though you could do that. All of these things that are seen as like sort of dysfunctional aspects of society are meant to be weeded out. And not only does it become a social issue, but it becomes a legal issue, in that you see courts, creating these laws, putting these laws on the books that say, maybe we should be able to sterilize you if we think that you are unfit. Right. Maybe you shouldn't have any children anymore. Not just these scrub cows, but what about scrub people?
Yeah. And it's fascinating because that tagline, better sires, better stock, in the early 20th century, all across the United States, they were having better baby contests. Yeah. And comparing babies and trying to figure out like what a good mom and a good dad are and who has the genes to pass on to make these better babies. And that too had a kind of a county fair, state fair, World's Fair kind of vibe to it. And just like a World's Fair, like it's that combination of, oh, this is fun, this is entertainment, this is carnival, but it is also seeding all of these ideas and values and new technologies. And this is the future kind of thinking into these moments in a way that gets pretty rough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, sort of into this mix as well is a kind of, Darwinism certainly is in the air. And I mean, I recently read a kind of early history of the rise of Nazism, and you see a sort of perversion of the concepts of Darwin and sort of fitness and how we can treat, and then also the explicit kind of like casting of humans as animals and lesser and often rodents or whatever. But, this blurring of the line between humans and animals and evaluation and fitness and survival of the fittest and so forth, which again, I would argue is a perversion of Darwinism, but nevertheless is out there. And a lot of and so I think that that's all sort of swirling in this moment.
It's no coincidence that like in 1924, you have the USDA publishing this pamphlet about, scrubs and the trial and so forth. And you have the state of Virginia passing its Eugenics Sterilization Act, which basically allowed states to perform sterilizations on people that they thought should not be having any more children.
Right. So, Kellie, so often when we've talked about the 1920s on this show, we've talked about a kind of resurgence of deep racism and institutionalized racism, and this is part of that. But I mean, this language about bodies, human bodies, especially black bodies, all that kind of language, that goes way back. So do you see it having, obviously you see the roots going back to slavery, but did it go away for a while and come back, or was it just always there?
Part of me says this is always there. It's always maybe more or less prominent in certain moments, but it's always there. You can go to like the auction block and you can think about how enslaved people were, put up on display and bid upon whether they were seen as having, like good birthing hips or strong arms or, good cooks, whatever the characteristic that people were looking for was something that was marketed and put on display. But I also think that in terms of the things that we think are not good for society, whether that's poverty or a disability or, someone that they think is dysfunctional. Those are the things that became markers of like, we should eradicate you. We should get rid of you. And I think you see it too, like not just in like these, spectacles, but if you think about lynchings during that time, like the judge, jury, and executioner, you get convicted of something, maybe you did it, maybe you didn't, but there was no justice in your prosecution. You were just disposed of. I think all of those sort of moments are tethered together with this violent way of disposing of someone or something that is unwanted.
And I also think it's important to note that this movement in the 19-teens and 1920s was seen by many of the people who were adopting it as a more civilized and more genteel way of approaching this, right? It's not the violence of lynching, ethnic cleansing, eradication. We are using science to breed better people. We'll take care of people who have disabilities now, but we'll just make sure that there aren't any of them in the future. Isn't that great, the way that science has allowed us to eradicate all of these problems?
This is for your good.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
So, look, let's start to wrap it up here. And I do want to come back to the absurdity of the scrub bull trials themselves and also the impact on the agricultural sector. But clearly there are these larger implications in this larger context. And, I will give credit to Victoria, who initially sent this email and said, not only is this weird, but it does evoke all these questions of eugenics and so forth. So, that's there. But did it work? I mean, the goal here was to create better agricultural products in this country to help the economy. What's our assessment?
Certainly the ideas of better breeding for livestock becomes central to the way that many in the agricultural industry think of livestock in the 20th century. They think about it before the 20th century, but because they're running head on into the agricultural depression of the 1920s and then the broader economic depression of the 1930s, it's kind of hard to put some of these ideas into practice at a time when the markets have largely collapsed. The thing that it does do is it does lead to that kind of consolidation you were talking about earlier, Jody, that if we were moving toward bigger farms and mechanization, these depressions are going to collapse a lot of those small farms and lead to these bigger ones that are more likely to have the resources to do this kind of very by-the-book breeding.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways in which you can mark progress, agricultural progress, and industrialization in this country. But one stat In 1900, the average dairy cow in America produced 424 gallons of milk each year. By 2000, that figure was 2,116 gallons, more than quadrupled the gallons of milk per year per average dairy cow in this country. So there you go.
Plus, you get all kinds of amazing new chemicals and
Oh, yeah.
supplements
Wonderful.
added to the milk. So
We haven't even talked about the big industry farming.
Yeah, totally. But anyway, we will leave it there. Circling back to our shout-outs, thank you, Victoria, for suggesting this. Yes, shout-out to Gabriel Rosenberg. I would be remiss to not also point out that our pal Nate DeMeo, who does the Memory Palace, a fellow Radiotopia show, has done an episode around this issue, and it's really fascinating and beautiful, as all of Nate's stories are. So we'll link to those. Go check those out. But this was really, really fascinating, and keep those suggestions coming, folks. We will leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you, as always.
thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. What is Odoo? Well, Odoo is the only software your business will ever need. Featuring a suite of integrated business applications, Odoo connects your business operations together so you can get more done in less time. Odoo has apps for everything: CRM, accounting, sales, HR, inventory, marketing, manufacturing, you name it, Odoo's got it. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday.
Radiotopia.